So what are this rather unhappy looking seagull, screen addiction in children, rising rates of depression and chronic disease in the developed world, and out of control cost of living crises have in common? Not to reduce these issues to a single factor, but one of the biggest causes is the unforeseen consequences of what we call human intelligence, which is probably one of the strangest topics in the known universe, along with how brown cows eat green grass and produce white milk. As a psychologist who straddles the line between understanding human intellect as well as its emotional and behavioral consequences, I want to talk about why this quality we have might be massively overrated in its value and importance, and how to reframe our understanding of intelligence, and if the pursuit of intelligence has gotten you on a wrong and very frustrating track in life, suggestions for considering other possibilities. I'll show that human intelligence, as it's commonly understood in the context of education, is something of an illusion. I mean, look at me. I have a doctorate in psychology. Does that make me intelligent? No. Well, that might not be the best example, so forget that part. But by the way, did you ever pause to consider that no matter how intelligent a person may be, one of the great ironies of human intelligence is that it involves thinking. Yet, no one knows precisely how electrochemical signals between brain cells translate into thought. We don't even understand our own brains, the organ from which intelligence arises. So humans are a pretty weird bunch. We glorify high educational achievement and intelligence and use it to build lives that increase our comfort, conveniences, and enjoyment, while simultaneously eroding our health, possibly destroying our planet, and creating risks like nuclear war that could obliterate us all in a single day. I don't know about you, but I'm not sure that qualifies as an outstanding achievement, and it makes me wonder, is human intelligence really just stupidity dressed up in a tuxedo and wearing expensive cologne? So, I'm not really trying to attack science and education or advocating for a return to the Stone Age and rejecting things like anesthesia for dental procedures. Technology has brought us some amazing benefits and comforts. But it's also essential to change how we think about intelligence and how we make use of it if we're going to give our children any kind of future, and also deal effectively with a general decline in mental and physical health in modern society. So why do I have a bit of an axe to grind with the idea of intelligence? One reason is that I can't tell you how many times I've worked with people in therapy, especially teenagers who attend schools with high standards and who are incredibly depressed, partially because of this relentless pressure of academics and the absence of more meaningful things in their lives, and the context against which to frame that intellectual backdrop. And these kids struggle with feelings of inadequacy because they weren't or aren't naturally academic, but spent years in a system that seems implicitly to determine your value based on your grades. It's not always a conscious process, but many times we come to determine our value as human beings based on some arbitrary point of reference, whether it be physical ability, appearance, financial status, or whatever. But in many cases, it is academic performance, probably because of what that implies. High intelligence, as defined academically, seems to imply a better person with brighter prospects in life. Conversely, lower intelligence maybe just not being good enough. Furthermore, how many people do you know, maybe yourself included, who felt pressured to go into career fields motivated by the lure of a high income, requiring years of costly education and hard work, and ended up disappointed with their overall quality of life? You essentially live out this rat race for a paycheck, and you lose yourself in the process. If you currently get home from a long day of work, exhausted, frustrated, and feeling like you need a stiff drink, maybe something is not the way it should be. And we should consider where and how this type of process originates before unintentionally foisting it on our kids when they grow up. Similarly, the way we have created hierarchies of prestige, money, and power around certain jobs has probably reinforced the idea of social classes, which in turn reinforces a sense of inequality and hence misery. For example, how high would you rank the job of trash collector as compared with doctor, lawyer, or software engineer? But at the same time, can you imagine how unlivable our cities and suburbs would be if trash collection stopped just for a few weeks? So I'm not advocating for communism here either, but I think we tend to take for granted the jobs that are essential to basic living while putting some jobs that have some unforeseen, quite negative consequences on a pedestal. It might seem like a silly example, but it is this type of thinking that drives our rat race career pursuits and the educational system that undergirds it. So, what even is intelligence? Psychology, perhaps the main field of science that studies intelligence, defines it as the ability to derive information, learn from experience, adapt to the environment, and understand or correctly utilize thought and reason. That's a good definition because it's pretty broad and could be applied equally to a tribe living in the Amazon and raising a child to know how to live off the land. But in many cultures, it still seems biased towards academic achievement. As we all know, a straight A student is often described as being intelligent, while someone who gets a bunch of D's is thought of as not the sharpest tool in the place where the sharp tools are kept, wherever that is, right? So, if this is an issue that has ever bothered you personally or has created tension between you and your children or you and your parents on the issue of academics, I want to share some perspectives that I think can offer new ways of thinking about intelligence and how to integrate it with our mental health, our well-being, and enjoyment of life in general, and maybe even the health of our planet. So one big issue with intellect is that it is often nearsighted. Humans can be ingenious when it comes to problem solving, but we lack a lot of times the foresight to predict how our solutions can become even bigger problems later on. One example is the invention of plastics, which undoubtedly required a considerable merging of intelligence, science, and education. Plastics solved numerous problems when they were invented. Think about things like IV bags and tubing and medical supplies, lightweight, durable containers for food packaging, storage, and transport, safety goggles and helmets on construction sites, or even the insulation that makes our internet cables functional. The cost, however, is also obvious. Our world today is choking on plastic pollution, and we're still making an additional 400 plus million tons of it every year, way faster than we can clear it from our environment, if we can actually clear it at all. And now we have the emerging issue of microplastics, which have been found on both the summit of Mount Everest and the deepest parts of the ocean. We literally cannot escape this stuff, and it's even been discovered within most of our physical tissues and even in our brains. Not only that, but there is the very weird logic of things like bottling spring water in some remote Pacific island, shipping it thousands of miles across the world, and that bottle of water being consumed in a minute or two, and then yet another plastic container entering the ecosystem for several hundred years before it breaks down. I just don't think it makes sense. And I doubt that when plastics were invented, this level of consequence was anticipated. Yet, here we are. I think this is a good example of the limitations of science, or maybe the difference between wisdom and knowledge, in not being able to think through the long-term consequences of our actions today. Another example of unforeseen consequence is that of providing food aid to war-torn regions of the world. If thousands of people are starving through no fault of their own and due to governments that are at war with each other, doesn't it make sense to send in food aid? Of course it does. It's basic humanitarian assistance for people that really need it. And what's the problem with this? Well, if it works as it's supposed to, great. But unfortunately, it often doesn't. One problem is that a massive influx of free food drives down the market value of food produced by local farmers, threatening their livelihoods. Another is government corruption, when people in power seize control of the supplies and use them for personal profit. Another is if warring factions manage to seize control of the supplies, withhold them from the people they are intended for, and use them to feed their rebel armies, thus enabling more bloodshed and oppression. Similar to long-term social services, these well-intentioned programs that do have merit and value in the short term can have unforeseen consequences in the long term, including fostering dependency on handouts rather than programs that make people genuinely independent. As the old adage goes, give a man a fish, feed him for a day. Teach him to fish, feed him for a lifetime. And one last example most of us can relate to. Most of us like, or maybe even love cars, for all sorts of obvious reasons. And they too solved some big problems with respect to personal transportation. But today, what is the cost? If you've ever spent a few hours trapped in your car in gridlock traffic, you have to wonder how we got ourselves into this mess. And is it going to keep getting worse? It's not just the frustrating hours spent stuck in your car. It's also unnecessary pollution, time spent away from family around dinner time, stress, and an extra $1,000 or so a year in gas as your car basically idles down the freeway at 5 miles an hour. So how does all of this align with theories of intelligence and how we engage in education? One thing for starters is recognizing that intelligence is many things, many of which are not academic. I can't take any credit for this idea, it's not mine at all, but you may have heard of Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, which I think makes a lot of sense. Gardner, a developmental psychologist, characterized humans as possessing intelligences such as bodily kinesthetic, for example athletes and dancers, musical, naturalistic, such as having an intimate connection with plants and animals in the living kingdom, logical, mathematical, as we typically associate with intelligence, spatial, and intrapersonal. As a funny example of how oddly these intelligences sometimes present themselves, consider Albert Einstein, one of the greatest geniuses of all time, who apparently used to get lost every time he went sailing, and this problem was compounded apparently by his inability to swim. So if you ever felt bad about not being one of the smart kids at school, don't. Maybe you have other untapped abilities, and because humans are so conditioned by their environment, i.e. how the school system works, what it incentivizes, and what it rewards, maybe we don't facilitate having kids reach their true potential. And before I take this notion a step further, I do want to clarify that I don't believe these theories of different intelligences are the same as excusing or advocating for laziness or ignorance, because these can breed obvious problems of their own. I'm just saying you don't have to be academic in order to be exceptional in life, to make life meaningful, and to make the world around us better. If you've been encouraged to excel in the STEM fields, that's science, technology, English, and math, for those who might not be familiar with that term or from a different country, they don't use that. But even if you did want to pursue the STEM fields, I would still encourage you to ask questions like, where is all this technology going? What is the net outcome of increasingly outsourcing our lives to technology? And now, even artificial intelligence. As it gets smarter, will we get dumber? As life becomes facilitated by technological conveniences, will we get even lazier and more out of shape? As it is, the way the food system has changed what and how we eat, and life has become more sedentary, we already have a situation where obesity and all of its associated health risks is pervasive. 80 to 90% of health issues in the US are preventable diet lifestyle issues, and despite the standard of living having gone up in most industrialized nations, mental health problems have increased rather than decreased. This is not a criticism of people who have become overweight or unhealthy, but rather the system we have unquestionably built that facilitates these kinds of problems. These healthcare costs impact us all via things like higher insurance premiums, and today, medical debt is the leading cause of personal bankruptcy. Obviously, we're doing something wrong. It's not that we shouldn't have technology, it's just that it seems to control us rather than us controlling it. The smartphone was probably the ultimate symbol of convenience and usefulness when it came out in 2007. But did anyone foresee how it would also become a symbol of addiction in children, and adults for that matter? not to mention the damage that social media has inadvertently caused via depression and cyberbullying. Yet, there is no question that smartphones also represent one of the pinnacles of intelligence, engineering, and science. By the way, we might also argue that AI may be able to offer solutions to all of these various social problems. But how do we know that it won't in itself create a whole bunch of unforeseen problems? That genie is unfortunately already out of the bottle. But I still hope that by changing how we think about the consequences of our actions today, asking more if this, then that type of questions, maybe we can shift more of our problems into a positive direction and maybe change the education system and how we view intelligence in the process. I'm not sure that we will be able to change the world's systems as they are at the upper levels of government and education. They are just so entrenched and complex. But maybe by teaching and modeling to children the virtues of these very legitimate other human intelligences, we can create more balance in society so that when we invent or deploy new technologies that are meant to improve our quality of life, we will also take a long view of the impacts of these technologies on us, our environment, and that in 10, 20, or even 50 or 100 years from now. Finally, to summarize very briefly some key findings from positive psychology, the science of what makes people happy. Much of the way we live in modern times is at odds with what makes us happy, genuinely happy. There is an essential distinction between deep, lasting feelings of joy, happiness, and contentment, and those of hedonic pleasure, the latter of which describes how many people pursue positive emotions in this day and age. The things that give us real and lasting joy are in no particular order: finding meaning and purpose in life, vibrant mental, emotional, and physical health, having good relationships, and engaging in altruism or helping others, adventure and connection with the natural world, and by extension, accumulating incredible experiences rather than material things. And the things that constitute hedonic pleasures are, and this is not an exhaustive list, things like passive viewing on screens, eating and drinking things all the time that serve only pleasure rather than health, sexual experiences, drugs, and other mind-altering substances, and the accumulation of things or material things rather than great experiences, many of which can be summarized as somewhat lazy, selfish pursuits. Now, I'm not also saying that the hedonic pleasures list is all bad either. Some of these are enjoyable for obvious reasons. But the issue is more that society has made a hardcore tilt towards the hedonic pleasures, most of which require very little effort, and a big shift away from the lasting joys. But as we all know, after eating some good ice cream or an hour spent on social media or watching a movie, the pleasures are fleeting and require constant refilling, hence their addictive nature, whereas the lasting joys often leave an afterglow that can last for decades, as in the fond memories of the best experience of your life that was shared with someone you love. Sadly, we appear as a society to be stuck on the hedonic trip, or hedonic treadmill as it's sometimes called, anxiously awaiting the next smartphone or blockbuster movie, and our mental health as a species reflects this dysfunction. It is on a steady decline globally. So maybe intelligence as we think of it is making us our own worst enemies. Evidence from studies of hunter-gatherer tribes around the world still living true to their ancestral tenets has demonstrated that despite their paucity of material possessions and arguably more challenging lives in terms of lacking modern conveniences, they are much happier than us. Because they live so simply and in accordance with nature, their needs are few and their life satisfaction is high. Family, community, food, and shelter seem to be pretty much all they need. The fact that they eat pure, unadulterated foods and are fairly active, resulting in vibrant health, doesn't seem to hurt either. Because no one accumulates great material wealth, there is a much greater sense of equality. There is no homelessness because the environment is their home. There may be a few skipped meals here and there, but there is enough to survive, and there are also times of abundance. For the most part, they live in the present, while most of us in an industrialized society are chasing the future. What I mean by that is that I think our average weeks are a microcosm of the big picture of work like crazy until retirement and then enjoy whatever's left. It can often be that way, working hard and managing chores Monday through Friday, and then squeezing in a little bit of rest and recreation on the weekend. But these days, even the weekends can be frantic for many of us. The obvious danger is that we endure the frenetic pace of life in the hope that retirement will make it all worthwhile. But for some, by the time they retire, their bodies have basically retired as well, and there isn't much left to work with, and life has basically passed us by. So it might seem like I'm romanticizing the hunter-gatherer lifestyles, but the anthropological studies attest to the simple way of life as being better in many significant ways than the rather high-stress civilizations we have built for ourselves today. I have no doubt that they do experience some significant hardships, but they seem to be generally acute, short-lived, rather than chronic, and they are thus better equipped to weather these challenges. Whereas for us, stress basically grinds us down day by day, as if death by 1,000 cuts. In short, I think we can learn a lot from how they live and take some notes. It really does make you wonder about who are the really intelligent ones, us or them. So I hope that gives you all some useful food for thought on the true nature of human intelligence and how what we typically assume to be intelligence can be such a two-edged sword. I think that's all I got on this. Let me know in the comments if you have any other thoughts or ideas you'd want to add to this topic, and maybe I can expand on them in a future video. All right, thanks for watching.